Another live Patriots Beat podcast. I'm Ryan Spagnoli. Alongside me, 98.5 The Sports Hub's Alex Barth, as well as CLNS Media's Mike Cadlick. Barth, Mike, good to be back with you guys. Should be a much different show than what we had, Monday night, Alex?
Yep.
Here for kind of some observations from day 11. Take it away right from the top. Sounded like a much better day for the offense in yesterday's practice.
Yeah, it certainly was, I think, and we sort of talked about this on Monday, right? I think a lot of the issues for them offensively are all tied to the offensive line, even if they're not directly happening up front. You saw the offensive line start to create some movement in the running game. You saw Mac Jones get time when he was able to throw the ball. It all just sort of opened up from there, right? So that is just very encouraging to me because it shows they can do it. Like, the upside is finally we see progress. And people ask, why are you guys so worried? Why is everybody freaking out? It's only August. They haven't played a preseason game yet. No team looks perfect this time of year, which, yes, no team looks perfect this time of year. We weren't freaking out because it wasn't perfect. We're alarmed because we didn't see any progress towards it getting better. So on one hand, we finally saw progress that's encouraging, but we finally saw progress on day 11, right? It's a little bit later than you'd like to see it. So that's kind of where we're at right now, but it's a positive step heading into this preseason opener. If they can carry that over into this game against the Giants and the joint practices next week, that's going to be a really good sign.
Yeah, and seeing it against, like you said, seeing it against a live defense tomorrow is going to be the tell for it all. Max said it after practice too, like getting 2% better every single day. Yesterday was really the only time we saw them get that 2% better. I mean, granted, they actually really started to get that zone blocking scheme going, if you will. They opened up holes for running backs, and they were actually making plus plays in 11s, which we hadn't seen for the past 2 weeks. So it's a good sign, but tomorrow is going to be a better tell for sure.
I think the biggest thing to take away from that, from this whole offensive struggle, right, that the slow start to camp, is that typically, if you were to ask me this, that this was going on, say, you're going to tell me this was going to go on a month ago, you would think, especially, knowing the media, how everything works, a lot of the finger pointing would be at Mac Jones. But it seems like it's everybody but him, which I guess is a good sign, because you log on to ESPN, you look at some of these, national programs. It's all about Tua Tagovailoa. Who's going to be the quarterback in 2023? Like, a lot of these struggles offensively have nothing to do with Mac Jones, which I think is a good sign. Barth, we talked about it a little bit off air. Early on in camp, especially in the spring, you started to see him really mature and kind of grow into his, per se, NFL body. The fundamentals, the footwork, it looked much stronger than it had last year. We saw the work that he put in the offseason was obvious on the field this spring and early in camp. Seemed like a little bit last week, right? Might have got a little lazy, maybe a step back. Are you seeing improvements from Mac Jones, not only from a leadership perspective, but overall his dictation of the offense, his ability to command the line of scrimmage, and just overall be a much better quarterback and take that next step, even though with a lot of moving pieces going on?
So I think it was trending that way, right? And I think he got a little, as they all did, I think the internal clock started speeding up. The pressure started hitting when the offensive line wasn't working. But you saw when things calmed down on Tuesday, he came back. And I think you're exactly right. I was bracing for the narrative that, Mac's not the guy. The rookie year was a fluke, this and that. And credit to the majority of the observers, they've correctly analyzed what's going on here. It's not a Mac Jones failure. It's the team failing, or the team looking like they might fail Mac Jones. And we talked about that a lot on Monday. I wrote about that for 985thesportshub.com yesterday. People can go check that out. Right? The assumption coming in was if Mac Jones doesn't take the year 2 leap, the offense is screwed. The only way the offense will be better is if Mac Jones is better. And what we're seeing now is kind of the opposite. Mac, it looks like the pieces are in place for that year 2 leap individually. But does Mac Jones being better guarantee the offense as a whole will be better? That's now the question we have to ask ourselves.
And even jumping off that, like when camp started 2 weeks ago and they were in shells and just kind of running sevens and not putting much together, Mac did look awesome at first. And then they brought everything together and it looked really crummy. So it was almost like, okay, what's going on with Mac Jones here? But then, as you said, we saw it on Monday, Alex, like it was really not him. It was maybe not even the play callers. People blame Patricia, people blame Judge, but it really just seemed like it was the offensive line's fault and they couldn't get that thing done. However, even going in from, Monday into yesterday, it seemed like they kind of learned everything overnight. It was really granted, it was only a little bit of progress, but they still really flipped the switch into yesterday.
Yeah, there were still some issues. It definitely looked better.
Right.
Like if they can, the thing is now, can they build on that, right? If
Sure.
they don't go back behind that point, they're in good shape.
Mm-hmm.
To say they learned it overnight, like I almost feel like you have to see it more than once, right? It's easy to do anything once. You can do something
Sure.
by accident once. You know, the whole water bottle flip thing, right? You can get that once. Can you get it 2 times in a row, 3 times in a row, 4 times in a row? And obviously this is much tougher. Orchestrating an NFL offense is much tougher than flipping a water bottle. So they got it one day. That's great. It's encouraging. I don't want to downplay that. But what's really exciting is when they do it 2 days in a row, and then 3, and then 4. And that's kind of what you want to see them build towards. And it's kind of a weird spot here, right? Because it was the last practice they had individually. Right. It might be the last one that's fully open to the media now that, it might be the last one that's fully open to the media. No, because they're going to practice Monday. But I doubt that will be in full pads. They'll probably practice Monday. I doubt that'll be in full pads. But then they've got joint practice. So they got preseason, that one Monday practice, joint, preseason. They might have 1 or 2 more. Then they go out to Vegas, joint preseason. Then that's it. So they were really kind of up against it. You know, a phrase I've been using a lot is it's early until it's not. And it was getting really close to being not early, and they made the step. Now can they continue it?
And what did you – was it primarily the offensive line that took a step forward, or was it just overall much better communication, guys running the right routes, Mac making the right reads? Was it just a collective much better day, or is it really up front in the trenches? Because, I mean, you saw with Andrews, obviously no one condones, right? They're not going to fight in the league. You're going to get a suspension, but that's some of the fire you want to see. We see it every year. Guys get into fights. They get thrown out of practice. It's hot. Everybody gets fired up, and it's a team captain who obviously took a lot of what happened early on in camp very personal. I think it's a good thing to see from a player like that. Was it kind of a collective unit or up front?
It's an upfront thing again, because I mean, you look at even the issues in the running game, and I go back to, I know this sounds simple and is a bit of an oversimplification, but the offense looks good in one-on-ones. Wide receivers versus corners look good there. Looks good when it's 7-on-7s, which is multiple receivers on the field at once with the quarterback. Looks good. It looks good there. And then you get to 11s and things halt. Well, what's different in 11s? What's there or not there in 11s that, is a different element from the 7s? The offensive line and a pass rush. The running game's a little more complicated because there is no other way to gauge the running game. You're running 11s. There is no 7s equivalent of running the football. But that's why I think it's on the line. I really think it's, and again, it all compounds. I think there are other issues. Again, Monday, the timing between Mac and his receivers looked really off. Well, it's hard to get your timing down when you can't actually rep any of these plays because you can't get time to set them up. So I think as the offensive line progresses and fixes itself, the rest of those problems will start to fix themselves as well. It will just all, it's all going to come together. Once the offensive line's last piece in the puzzle, once they get that set, if and when they get that set, I expect the rest of the issues to kind of dissipate.
And this is an interesting question I want to bring up that Ashley brought up. I kind of want to get more, in tune with the chat. Do we move Onwenu to right tackle if Wynn can't go for the season opener? We talked about it on last show, Alex, right? A lot of this is a lot of moving pieces. Shaq Mason's gone, right? You flip-flopped your tackles. Trent Brown to left tackle, Isaiah Wynn primarily at right tackle. Then you insert, Cole Strange, who's, from the day he was picked, was projected to be a day one starter. We've seen from Onwenu, obviously he struggled to find time consistently on the field last year, but primarily as a guard. But, I think anybody who was down there every day for the last 2 years would agree, especially on the field, Onwenu project much better as a tackle, right? And Isaiah Wynn in the last year of his contract, is that a move we could potentially see? Because, like I said, it seems like they're timid on moving Onwenu, kicking him outside, when it seems like that's more of his natural fit from the time we've seen him the last 2 years.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's a guard. I would agree with the comment. I think he's better at guard. Now, he hadn't played that position since high school until he started playing it in 2020. I like him as a tackle in the traditional system. The thing is, in this new system, he's not a great fit at guard because that's just not his game, moving around, right? Well, he's not going to be any better at tackle. So I think if the issues Wynn, and look, Wynn didn't practice the last 2 days. You saw Yadin Kajust and Justin Haran out there. I don't think if Wynn moves on, I don't think Onwenu's the the fix. I think he's staying at guard. I think the fix is they're gonna go with some depth.
I mean, I would hope so. I just think with how athletic Wynn can be from kicking, I don't know. We've talked about it for years ever since, and people
They're
will
not
kill
going to
me
play
if
Wynn at guard. They're just not. If they were going to do it, they would have done it.
They would have done it years ago, right? But I just thought with a newer offensive scheme and they're flip flopping everything around, like why did they flip the two in general, right? Is it because Brown's been a little bit more reliable in his career? It just ever since the move, it was very, I guess, head scratching because I'm a team Isaiah Wynn guy, right? Like we talked about it. He's a top 32 tackle. He's a starting caliber tackle in the league. Is he, a top 10 tackle? Is he somebody that's going to break the bank? No, but I'm sure he'd start on a majority of the NFL teams. His biggest problem has been staying healthy. So I just curious with the switch, why they ever even did it in the first place.
So I'll be honest, I don't know why they didn't switch last year. I wanted them to switch last year. In the traditional system, I like it better. Trent Brown's a better. He's your best tackle. He should be your left tackle. That's just the way it works. So I think the reason they switch it for this scheme again is to take advantage of that athleticism off the strong side. But it's a tough. I think they should have switched last year. Like to me, they're late to it.
And Brown was hurt last year, so who knows? I mean, even in camp though, we really didn't see it.
Right.
Brown missed a lot of time early on in the year, but everybody knows when he's on the field, just like Wynn, they're productive players. Those are guys that have played a lot of meaningful snaps for you and certainly reliable tackles on either side. But want to stick on the offense here. We talked about him a little bit on Monday, Alex and Mike. Taekwon Thornton continues to shine. I think the biggest thing with him is he's not just a speedy guy, right? He's showing time and time again that this guy can run routes and can put defenders on skates. And I think he's making a case for himself to really compete for snaps this year because on draft night, when it was kind of known, or I guess when Nelson Aguilar's fate here in New England, right, there was a big time here in the offseason where people thought maybe he'd be moved because of the cap hit and they had to create cap space. He was never going to be moved, right? With guys like, you assume Parker's your 1, Bourne's your 2, Myers your 3, whatever order you kind of want to place them. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of snaps to be, competed for in that 4, 5, 6 range. And Taekwon Thornton's making a name for himself to really push, I think, Nelson Aguilar and find time on the field. Because when draft night, it was kind of, maybe this kid's a project. He's very slim. He's fast. He might need to develop and learn how to run routes. But he's shown that this guy can compete and certainly compete for snaps this year to help this football team.
It's the first time.
Go ahead, Mike. No,
it's the first time that I've seen a Patriots rookie wide receiver come in and actually show something ever. So like that in itself excites me. I feel like every time they bring in a new guy, everyone's like, oh, he's going to be the next N'Keal Harry. He's going to be the next, whatever you want to call it. And he's actually showing
them for a long time.
I know it. Yeah, it's awful. But like, not only is he showing that speed in 1-on-1s and 7s, but even when they're in 11s, he's getting reps with the 1s, which I noticed yesterday. And he's not like, he doesn't look intimidated by any means, which is a good thing in itself. And he also just goes and gets the ball. Not only is he quick, not only do they get it to him in space, but he goes up and snatches the ball, which is something you want to see from these guys because like last year, for example, we never saw that out of Aguilar. He was quick, but I mean, you saw it in the Bills game in the playoffs. He did not go up and high point a ball in the end zone and it got intercepted. So, he's just bringing a lot to the table really early, which is ultimately exciting to see.
Yeah, and again, to me, I've talked about this before. If you've heard me on here, if you've read me on 98.5 The Sports Hub, on the Sports Hub Patriots podcast, it's consistency. He's doing it on a regular basis. These aren't flashes. It's not, well, he has to do this more often. No, he's coming out every day and he's getting a little bit better. And that's exactly what you want to see. You talk about how he's not just a burner. Guys at that speed, especially that speed and size, sometimes their speed's their whole tool bag because they never have to develop beyond that. There's a lot more to his game. I mean, he can play at all 3 levels. He can be an impact at all 3 levels. He's a really good hands catcher. That's what stands out to me, especially guys that small. They're normally catching the ball in their body. He can go out and get the ball away from his frame. And, I look at that with a guy like him and then Devontae Parker. Those are 2 guys with really good catch radiuses. Mm-hmm. So you put those 2 guys on the field, like that's a tough coverage assignment. Yeah, I'm really excited by what we've seen from him. Obviously, there's still a ways to go. I'm not, let's not fit him for a red jacket just yet. He hasn't played an NFL team. I think the next 7 days are monumental for him. He's going to have 2 preseason games, right? His first live NFL action, and the joint practices are going to be big. Stephon Gilmore, J.C. Horn. He's going to face corners he hasn't faced, corners of a caliber he hasn't faced here in New England. That's going to tell us a lot.
Alex, what number do you think he's going to wear? I saw your tweet earlier.
So I
saw
wouldn't be
yeah.
I wouldn't be
Mike
surprised.
hit the nail on the head with his projections. Those would.
What was yours? What was yours, Mike?
That wasn't me. That was somebody else, I think.
Mike Dussault.
With what?
From Patriots.
Mike
I was gonna
Dussault,
say.
yeah, Mike
Yeah, I was
Dussault,
gonna
88.
say. Yeah.
Yeah,
88.
I mean, I'd love to see 88. I think that would be sick.
Would be.
Here's because I do this every year. I do the research, try to figure it out. He wore 18 at Baylor.
I was
That's
gonna
obviously
point
off the
this
board,
out.
Johnny Smith. He wore 80. 81. He
81
wore
and 9.
at Baylor.
81 and
Yeah,
9.
starting off in 9. Those are taken. He wore 4 in high school. Now, Malcolm Butler has 4. So here's what I'm wondering. Would he take like a placeholder number? Remember, Nikhil did this. Nikhil was 8 in the preseason. We've seen other guys do this too. Christian Barmore last year, right? Christian Barmore was 70 in the preseason, and then he switched to 90 once things ironed out. So maybe he takes 19. If he takes 88, I think he kind of has to keep it.
Just stay away from 17, please. Stay away from
17.
17.
Christian Wilkerson to 17, so we're good there.
That's true.
But
I forgot about him.
So I don't know what his connection is to 4, why he wore it in high school, but if he's connected to that, if Malcolm Butler doesn't make the team, or maybe Malcolm Butler switches his number after the 53 comes. Maybe he makes a team and a double-digit number opens up for him. Like, I wonder if Taekwon Thornton would go back to 4. It's not the prettiest wide receiver number, but if a number has a good story, I'm all about it. Like 9 for an edge rusher is horrible, but Matthew Judon's the 9th of 9 children, so that's instantly a cool number now, right?
Means something, yeah.
So if he gets 4, we can ask him why 4 and all of that. But I think 19 if it's a placeholder, 88. But if he takes 88, that tells me he wants 88. You don't take 88 as like a maybe I'll hang on to this, maybe I won't.
Yeah.
You take 88, you're taking 88.
And sticking on Thornton too, obviously his frame, right, was kind of the big, I guess, red flag or topic of discussion where areas where he could see flaws in the league. But Alex, we talked about it too. He can play outside because his release game is so quick.
His release game is excellent.
How much does that impact him though, right? Going up against it's matchup based, but we'll see, I guess, in the next week, right? These bigger, longer, more physical corners, is that going to affect him at the line of scrimmage primarily? Like that's the one worry I have with him, right? I mean, we've seen it. He's fast. He can run routes. He can certainly get open. It seems like he's catching on. But is that still one area where it's a little, iffy with Thornton?
No, I like it, and it forces you to defend him differently, right? Because the book on most of these speed guys is you take your biggest, strongest, nastiest corner
and jam him,
you roll him in his face, and you punch him in the mouth at the line and make him beat it. And a lot of those guys don't. Thornton early on looks like he has a bit of a release package, maybe more developed than a guy like a John Ross or a Darius Hayward-Bay, right? And to say he's not John Ross doesn't mean he's great, but it's a step. And you look at the way the Patriots have drafted in the past, not John Ross, I think we would all enjoy that pick. So I'm encouraged. Again, this goes back to I'm encouraged by his release package, but he's been repping against the same 7 or 8 guys for 3 weeks now. He might kind of have the rhythm figured out. This is why Thursday night and then next week are going to be so big. What does that release package look like when he goes against other teams?
And that's how these skinny framed guys stay in the league, is having a release package like that, because you're not going to get it. You're not going to get away with just your speed alone. You have to be able to get off the line. So him showing that this early is like, it's different. It's something. He's a different player.
Right.
And kind of shifting our focus to tomorrow night, obviously preseason game number 1. Who knows how much? I know the Giants came out early on last week. Dayball had said, a lot of their starters are going to play at least initially. I guess it's yet to be seen. It seems like we'll see a lot of Bailey Zappi and Brian Hoyer tomorrow night. I wish maybe we'd see a little bit more of the starters. Like I said, this is all assumption, right? With how much struggles they've had early to camp. I think what better way to kind of put this past week behind you than go out and have a good game, even if it's for a quarter or a couple series. Really get your the right foot forward heading into the next week. Anything you're looking forward to? For me, it's the wide receivers. I noted it yesterday. Trey Nixon seems to have, building off a strong spring, having a good camp. Like I said before, your top 3 are set in terms of wide receivers, but I think there's some wiggle room and some snaps to be competed for that 4, 5, 6 range. And I was actually trying to look up how many they kept, how many actual receivers, right? Because last year they had Gunnar Olszewski primarily as a punt returner, and then obviously Matthew Slater, categorizes as a wide receiver, but he's never going to play. how many do they keep at the 53-man roster cut down day, and how many will actually play come week one? Because like I said, those top 3 are set, but I think after that, there could be some snaps to be won over the course of the next week or so.
So yeah, to me, the wide receiver position is more about shaking it out, right? In terms of the snaps. I think pending a trade, Aguilar, Bourne, Myers, Parker, Thornton, like those 5 guys are making the team. And if anybody's getting moved, it's Aguilar or Myers. Then it gets interesting. Like Ty Montgomery, I think, is going to make the team, but is he a wide receiver? Is he a running back? They have him listed as a wide receiver. That doesn't really mean anything. But you keep going further down. Okay, now we get to Trey Nixon, right? Trey Nixon's had a really good camp. Trey Nixon in a bubble has played well enough to make this team. Is there room for him on the roster? And then you get into this weird spot where how well does he have to play to unseat somebody? Because he would, I mean, you're talking about he basically has to unseat Myers or Aguilar, which would be he's got to play at a very high level all 3 games. And if he gets close to that but doesn't get there, I mean, they're not getting him on the practice squad, right? Somebody will claim him if they waive him. So do they bury him? Do they try to hide him so they can get him back on the practice squad? Would they keep 7 receivers? And what would that look like? Where do they trim elsewhere? I think 2 tight ends is a real possibility. That could be one spot. Maybe they go a little thinner at running back. I think at this point, it's safe to say James White won't be on the week 1 roster. It's really trending that way. But, if then you keep J.J. Taylor off, you're down to 4 running backs. Maybe that's where they trim. So, yeah, the wide receiver situation is fascinating at the top. Who's going to win those snaps? Then further down the Trey Nixon. Another one, good point in the chat. Does he play special teams? Right? There's a lot to figure out there.
And looking last year, they kept 5, including Gunnar Olszewski. It was Myers, Bourne, Aguilar, N'Keal Harry, and Gunnar Olszewski. 5 was very thin, I think, in terms of what they had.
It's going to be over that this year.
It has to be, right? And you look at the depth, right?
We haven't even, for the people who are going to moan about it, yes, Matthew Slater, but he's his own thing. Bill actually said the other day Slater's more of a safety than a receiver, so.
Yeah, I mean, with his, I guess, awareness. But, yeah, I think the receiver room, right, we talked about it, the running backs, is that how are they going to manage these guys? This necessarily isn't in terms of tomorrow night. Pierre Strong should get a heavy run. It looks like he's turning the corner.
I'm excited to see Pierre Strong.
So Pierre Strong's an interesting one, and I think we're going to learn a lot about him tomorrow night because he really hasn't practiced until this week, and they're not going to put a guy out there, even if he's healthy. If they don't think he's ready and they think it's not a good idea to put him out there, they won't put him out there, right? They won't put him in a spot to fail. So if we don't see Pierre Strong a lot tomorrow night, that tells us he's further away. Not that he's not going to make the team, but maybe he's an inactive to start the season, things like that. If we see a lot of him tomorrow night, that tells me that even though he missed that time, they don't see him as far behind and he's right there and he's in the conversation to have a role week 1. I think we learn a lot about Pierre Strong tomorrow night. That's a big one.
Yeah, and on the defensive side of the ball, Ronnie Perkins, right? I think there's, talk about receivers and snaps to be made, that they look to be dominant up front, right? But what does it mean for Ronnie Perkins, Anthony Jennings, Josh Uche? How does that whole kind of edge off-ball linebacker shake out? Cameron McGrone, who has had kind of a, I guess, I don't want to say a disappointing start to camp, but I don't think he's lived up to the hype that, a lot of people had hoped for in the offseason when they kind of had this new wave of linebackers coming in with him, McMillan and the uptick in roles for Uche and Jennings. How does that all shake out? And how much do we see those guys tomorrow night? I'd be hoping to see like we saw last year. I think we saw the ones for a series or 2. And it was heavy, right? Like it was Cam looked great. He threw. Jonnu Smith looked awesome. And that just completely had nothing to do with how the team shaked out week 1 and for the rest of the year. So obviously there'll be a lot of overreactions, but I guess that's what I'm looking forward to see the most in terms of, their defensive side of the ball, primarily the front 7.
Mike, you go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, as far as the front 7 goes, like they just look so much faster than they did a year ago. Like last year you had, bulky Dante Hightower in the middle, and like they couldn't really like stretch covering the run game, and it just looked really crummy at times. Obviously they had a really bad run defense. With guys like Jennings being like fully healthy now and Raekwon McMillan in the middle, they just look like they're covering much more ground. And even against like the short passing game, they're rallying to the ball so much faster. Granted, it's against this Pats defense, or excuse me, this Pats offense, who clearly hasn't really shown much yet. But seeing this against another look tomorrow night is going to be interesting to see just how fast they really get to the ball.
Yeah, and I think what's really interesting about that, we're going to see it right away, right? What did the Patriots struggle with last year? It was kind of contained out of the backfield. Well, I don't know how much we'll see Saquon Barkley, but the Giants have said their guys are going to play. That's a good test. Saquon Barkley is a good test for how fast are your linebackers, how athletic are your linebackers. Even, going beyond that, and some people were kind of into it in the chat there, was another thing the Patriots defense struggled with last year. Fast, shifty slot receivers, Isaiah McKenzie, right? Giants have two, and Kadarius Toney and Wan'Dale Robinson. I don't know how much they're going to play, but I would think Wan'Dale Robinson will play a significant amount. Him versus Marcus Jones.
They listed him as a starter. They already listed him as a starter according to their first depth chart. Which, granted, they'll still play him because he's a rookie, but that was interesting to see too.
Yeah, no, that matchup, Marcus Jones versus Wan'Dale Robinson, is going to be really interesting. But you're just going to see between him, Miles Bryant, kind of how they deal with some of these faster slot receivers. So that's going to be a really interesting one to watch.
And the backup quarterbacks too, right? Like, we'll obviously see a lot of Zappy and Hoyer, but I think, obviously Mac's your guy. He's your guy going forward. How do they handle that week one, right? You saw when Brady's last year here, who'd you have? You had Stidham and Hoyer. Hoyer was, primarily he was cut at cut down day, and obviously went to Indy and then brought back the next year. But it'll be interesting to see how this pans out. Is Hoyer going to be the one in street clothes, right? Because I think if anything were to happen, push comes to shove, you'd probably want Zappy in there. But it seems like Hoyer's obviously the guy who's been here forever. He's a glorified quarterback coach for Mac and the veteran in that room. I'm interested to see Zappy. I liked watching him play in college. If you remember Western Kentucky, just lit it up all over the place. That guy covered everything. It was, overs, and he just threw it all over the yard. So I everything you read about him and you see, the kid can spin it, right? But can he read an NFL defense? I think it'll be interesting to see how he shakes out, because you see for years, Alex, we talked about it back at the draft. Every 3-4 years, they take a kid in the fourth round. They just reset the clock on their their career backups when they think they have a guy. With Brady, right? They took Mallet and Garoppolo and Stidham and Rohan, right? Like the names just go back. Right. I'm interested to see him. I think this kid's a pure thrower and somebody that can, dime it up a little bit. But he hasn't had a good start to camp, right?
He had a little bit of a rough start, like early on. He's gotten much better. He's kind of starting to put more touch on the ball now. When he first got here, everything was just a line drive, and it was getting to him, right? And he's now starting to be a little more gentle with the throws when it calls for it. Yeah, he's gonna be a fun guy to watch. He was really fun in college. I think he'll be impressive. I think people will kind of start to understand why the Patriots took him when they did.
I'm curious to see too how he adapts to learning a new offense again, because like I asked him yesterday, he learned a new offense when he got to Houston Baptist. Then he transferred to Western Kentucky, learned a second offense, threw for $6 grand and 62 touchdowns like last year, which was unheard of, literally NCAA records. Learning a third system in as many years should be interesting. Granted, he's done it before, so like you guys, I want to see him sling it too.
Right. Well, he also has to get used to, he's coming from the spread. He's got to get used to working under center, which is something he talked about the other day.
Right.
And too, like this, back to the covering the speedy guys, right? Toney and Wan'Dale Robinson. Not that they're on par of Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill, what they're going to face twice a year, and probably be competing for, a playoff spot with obviously the Bills kind of being the kings in the East. I think it's a good test, right? How do they match up, right? Jonathan Jones is primarily your slot guy who's done it for years. He's locked down some of the best guys, but now they got, like we talked about, they improved. They obviously lost that true shut down cornerback one, man cover guy on the outside, but I think where they really improved in their secondary, primarily at the corner spot, is they loaded up with athletes, right? You got John Jones back, Marcus Jones. Jack Jones seems to be kind of a sticky ball hawk guy, somebody that's, I think a little undersized, but I think he can, he's going to be able to run with a lot of guys in the field. So interesting to see how they match up with Toney. And then obviously how much we see him, who knows. Kenny Golladay, kind of a bigger guy on the outside, who would be probably Malcolm Butler or Jalen Mills on a guy like that, somebody that's a little bit longer and more physical.
Yeah, and that's kind of the guy they don't have the matchup for. And it's interesting because they've gone against Devontae Parker in camp, and Devontae Parker looks really good. They don't have that big outside corner outside of Juwan Williams, who's kind of, Juwan Williams. So I think how they defend Galladay, like you said, if he plays, will be an interesting one. And, they've been moving Jonathan Jones out to the slot. Is he a guy that, do they give him a shot at that? And that will tell us a lot.
I mean, how much of those guys there really left, though, right? Those big, long, like Metcalf, how much do you see in Pickens? I know Pittsburgh's a bigger team, but it seems like the game in general is
there's still big receivers. I would say,
right, they're more well-rounded, right? They can run. They're threats at all three levels of the field, right? Where
size is size. You still have to be, even if they don't play like traditional bigger receivers, you still have to be able to defend it. Just to go through the schedule, Chase Claypool week 2 against the Steelers is a big receiver. At Pickens as well. Alan Lazard week 4 against the Packers. You get into the Browns week 6. Amari Cooper's not a small guy. Luckily for them,
Jamar's not either. He's over 6 feet, I believe.
Yeah. Luckily for them, N'Keal Harry's hurt week 7. You don't have to deal with his size. But
I was worried.
Yeah, they got DeAndre Hopkins later in the schedule. Devontae Adams, like they've got big receivers they're going to have to deal with.
Right. No, I just, obviously get the safety help too. And curious to see how it all shakes out defensively. I think for the first time too, we talked about it, that corner room, that's the biggest thing for me with this team. I think it's an issue that's not talked about enough because of the struggles offensively. I'm curious to see how that shakes out because it could be for the first time in 10, 12 years, man, the secondary is not the strong point of their team. And you said they're going through a gauntlet of receivers. They got Jamar Chase this year. They got, like you said, Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill twice, Stephon Diggs and Gabriel Davis, right? There's no slouches on their schedule, right, in terms of that position. And this is the first year in a long time where they don't have a true, right? I mean, think of the good, like Stephon Gilmore and J.C. Jackson are on the same team for a long time. Like you take that for granted. I think that's a big test for them early on in the year, right? Take away kind of the conversations we've had from camp from the offense. There's some, I think, a little bit of, uncertainty there at that corner room, and it hasn't been talked about enough. I think probably in a good way because they've looked good, right? I think the offense has struggled more than they've, faced on this defense, but I'm curious to see how that shakes out.
Prior to the offense completely unraveling over the last week, corner was my main concern. I wrote about it earlier in camp. Now they're moving, like Alex said, they're moving John Jones to the boundary. They moved him out there yesterday anyway. They have Marcus and Jack Jones kind of working in already. So they're going to get reps early and they're going to have to like show their stuff right away. That corner room, it's not like it used to be. Defensive back as a whole, go ahead.
Someone's going to step up though. Like there's going to be a known, is it going to be Jamal Williams?
Corner?
Is it Sean Wade? Like who is it,
Is it going to be Terrence Mitchell on his 8th team in 7 years?
If they get a boost at corner, I think it's coming from off the roster. I just like Terrence Mitchell can be fine, I think, as that number 2. But if they're really going to get an improvement, like Malcolm Butler, I think can be good in spurts, but I don't know how consistent he can be. Jack Jones, the same thing as a rookie. That's a spot I think they look to add, as camp wraps up around roster cuts. Like corners still is honestly my biggest question mark because I think as rough as the offensive line has looked, the pieces are all in place to get it figured out. I don't know that that's true about corner. I don't know that the pieces are there for them to be at the level they need to be at. The best thing that can happen in the secondary right now is just the pass rush turns it up and keeps things easy on them.
And tomorrow's Malcolm Butler's first game action in like a year and a half because he was out wasn't he out all year last year? So I mean,
he was retired.
Yeah, it's completely different than just practice reps.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't know about you guys. I'm certainly football's back, right? Like I think John tweeted it. It's so true.
Yeah,
you can't wait for that first preseason game, and then once it comes, you can't wait for it to be over. But I think
you get like 5 minutes in, and you're like, all right, this is not
awful.
when I said football's back. This is not what I was talking about.
Right.
Once Jared Stidham crosses the goal line,
I was happy to see him the other night. That was good to see him throwing around. No, all kidding aside, but. No, like I said, I think it's not as I think the last 2 years we were spoiled at camp because the year before you had COVID and it was just no sports, right? And then you had Cam Newton coming in, and last year you had a quarterback, really 2 years of quote unquote quarterback competitions, right? So there was so much focus at that position. Whereas this year, you have the guy, it's a lot of moving pieces at some spots where we haven't seen in past years, right? The line, the corner room. So I don't want to call it a boring camp, but there's just not that juicy headline that we're used to the last 2 years. But I think that makes it interesting in its own sense for these preseason games. See how things shake out, who gets more time, who's on the bubble and things like that.
I think the interesting thing about this camp, or maybe the not interesting thing about this camp, I should say, it's been very stagnant. The fun part of camp is the flow. The offense has a good practice or two, then the defense comes back, then the offense gets one, right? And there's usually that one day where it just, they both somehow look really good, even though they're facing each other. And it's been outside of Tuesday when the offense stepped up. It's really just been the same thing day after day after day. It's been Groundhog Day, as my colleague at 98.5, Matt Dolph, has said, right? There hasn't been a ton of variation. Like, how many news stories have there really been? New, N-E-W, not news, new. How many news stories have there really been throughout camp? Not a ton. I think it's going to get interesting when we get later in a camp. I started working on my roster projection today, and I'll drop that Friday on 98.5thesportshub.com. There's going to be a lot of interesting roster crunches. I talked earlier about Trey Nixon, and even if he plays well, is there a spot for him? How do they view Ty Montgomery? There's a battle at tackle. I think there's some really tough decisions to make up front. It's Ronnie Perkins, Cameron McGrone. It's kind of tough to figure out their situations. So this will get interesting later once we get to the roster cuts and we can really narrow in on some of those middle to bottom of the roster guys. But yeah, it's been sort of, I don't think, look, last year you had a quarterback battle. That's the most exciting thing that can happen at camp. So no matter what happened this year was going to be a step back, but it's just been the same thing day after day after day. It's been a little monotonous because you don't have that give and take that you usually get this time of year.
Yeah, I mean, things start to heat up too with joint practices, right? I mean, that's
right.
It's good to see. Like you said, Bill calls them more important than the games, right? Because that's the first time the ones can really go at it. I guess it's a combination of 2 days, right? You're going up against another defense, another offense, give you some looks. It gets competitive at times, so it's going to start to pick up. But like I said, I just think this year we were spoiled the last really 2 years. But yeah, as I said, I think it'll be interesting to see where there's a lot of turnover from last year, and I think in past years with a lot of guys that played a lot of meaningful snaps. It'll be interesting to see how that shakes out because, like I said, corner, we have no idea their depth chart there. Who's going to line up where on week one? Aside from the Judon and guys like that off the edge and their off-ball guys, like how is that going to shake out? So that's interesting in its own sense, but that's like the little things you don't really see in camp because it doesn't, I guess, play to their strengths, right? It's more in the games, right. It's more in the joint practices, so it should pick up. But yeah, looking forward to tomorrow night. I know us three will all be down there, so check out for coverage. Alex, I believe we're going to do a recap show Friday at some point to kind of recap the game. Look forward to next week. But other than that, thanks for tuning in, and we will.
Oh, wait, hang on.
Go ahead,
Before we wrap
Barth.
this up,
you have
to do. Where is it?
You need your minute. You need your minute.
We do have to do a quick Boston Sports Minute. Thank you, Amit.
I got nothing.
Chris Sale fell off his bike and broke his wrist when he was rehabbing. The Red Sox need to stop counting on Chris Sale. They came into this year with 5 starting pitchers with major league experience, including Sale. They were set up to fail in that regard. From the broken rib to the belly button infection or whatever that was. There was the mystery injury earlier this year. Now this, the guy just can't stay healthy. He's 6'4", 180 pounds. He's 33 years old. It's just, I think and some fans have this expectation. I get why the fans have it, but it's almost like the Red Sox feel the same way that Chris Sale's magically, when he does get healthy, whenever that is, he's just going to be 2018 Chris Sale again. That seems to be the belief. It reminds me of Dustin Pedroia towards the end and I love Dustin Pedroia. He's a great player in his prime, but there was those last couple of years of the contract, which is he was old. He had some chronic knee issues, wrist issues. It's unfortunate. But there was still this belief that he was going to come back and hit 300, even though he hadn't done it for 4 years. So I don't blame Chris Sale. People say, why is Chris Sale riding his bike? Why are you putting him on his bike when it's important? Look at his injury history. If it wasn't his bike. It was going to be something else. Why didn't he take an Uber to get the food? Because he probably would have strained his shoulder opening the door. Well, then why didn't he get DoorDash? Because when they give him the bag, if the bag's too heavy, he probably would have broken his wrist trying to hold it up, right? It's just, I'm done with this guy. I'm done with him, and the Red Sox need to be done with him. I'm not saying cut him because they can't afford it. If you get something from him, great. Don't plan on it. Operate as if you won't have Chris Sale, and then if you get him, for however many games you get him, great. That's just extra. Stop making this guy part of the plans.
That was like the biggest FU from Dombrowski on the way out, right? Because I think, Barth, you would probably know better than me, but that was kind of the falling out between Dombrowski and ownership, right? They didn't want to give him that big deal, and Dombrowski gave it to him, and that kind of, right? There was obviously things that went on behind the scenes that were trending that way.
If
that was
ownership didn't want him to give, I don't know, that might be a little far, because if ownership didn't want him to give the deal, they would have fired him before he gave the deal. No, I think it was ownership overcorrecting. They saw what happened when they let John Lester go in 2011, and they overcorrected, and they were wrong both times. John Lester was a workhorse. John Lester, you can run it to the ground. This all goes back. It all goes back to John Lester. You can, from the Mookie Betts stuff, Chris Sale, David Price, the Andrew Benintendi trade, all of it. All of the Red Sox modern issues trace back to the fact that they did not pay John Lester, because they've been chasing that decision ever since, between bad contracts, a general manager carousel, all of it. And I know they got a title in there, but yeah, they basically burned the entire thing to the ground to get a title for 1 year. It all goes back to that. So it's,
is it the worst? I don't think it's the worst. People forget about Carl Crawford. Like, that was really bad.
That was
I know
terrible,
Sale makes way more in terms of per year, but
I would say, first off, Sandoval was a worse deal than Crawford. Crawford wasn't good, but Crawford just wasn't a good player. Sandoval was like a punchline, right?
Yeah.
With his belt popping off.
Either was good.
Yeah.
Here's the question about Sale. Was it really a bike accident? You guys caught me off guard with the podcast here. I'm still at my office at BU, and if you look down ComAv, I don't see any skid marks. I don't know. There was
who really cares at this point, right? Because he wasn't going to pitch again this year.
It might have been
I'm done with
them.
them.
Who knows?
Yeah,
right.
It's beating a dead horse with him. The thing that sucks is the human aspect of it, because I think that's a guy like, it's not like Sandoval where he just flat out just didn't give a crap. Like Chris Sale, when that guy wants the ball, right? Like he wants to pitch, he wants to contribute, and it's really unfortunate, right? Like there's some give and take there. It's not like a guy who just, I don't really care, I don't want to play anymore. That's not the case with him. That's what makes it so frustrating.
Right.
And you see the glimpses. 2018, I guess, was his last really big year, but big lefty, the sweeping curve, the slider, like throwing 99 to 100. Like, he was electric. He had electric stuff for a long time. It's unfortunate it played out this way. Like you said, Barth, whatever they can get out of him, great, but don't rely on him. Go into the year next year, assuming you're getting 0 innings, and see what happens. I think that's the best plan for them, especially that pitching staff, which needs a ton of work.
Yep. Anybody got anything on Durant or no?
I haven't seen anything since. Who knows what happens?
I saw something today that they were trying to get Tatum and Brown out of the Celtics. I mean, that's a joke.
Yeah, the Nets are delusional. Nets are completely delusional.
Yeah.
Anyway, all right. We got to get Boston Sports Minute now.
Yeah, we did. But anyways, we will see you guys on Friday to recap Thursday's game. Once again, Ryan Spagnoli, Alex Barth of 98.5 The Sports Hub, and CLNS's own Mike Cadlick. We will catch you guys later this week. Tune in for coverage and content coming from tomorrow night's game, and we'll be on here Friday at some point to recap it.